thank you for having us today and welcoming us to your beautiful country. So we're going to talk today about how to make the most out of the data on your website and turning it into a beautiful experience for your website users. So I'm Grant, and I'm the Senior Partner Manager for the Cookiebot Partner Program. Richard?
Yeah, I'm Richard. I'm the Technical Support Lead. So basically that means if it's broken, I'll fix it for you.
Yeah, you are Mr. Fix-It. So what we're going to talk about today is what you should know about data privacy, the privacy landscape today, and why it's such a hot topic, particularly in this country. There's been some new regulations come in place in January. One of the favorite pieces, nobody loves banners, but why you actually need one. And then afterwards, what happens with the consent and how to drive those business decisions afterwards, how to do opt-in optimization, and then we'll have some time maybe for one Q&A, I think, based on where we are now. So, Richard.
I have a question for you. How many of you have this bag? How many of you knew when accepting this bag that there was actually a cookie in there? It's far more than I expected. Okay, let's just pretend that you have some very strong feelings about cookies. Like either you really hate them or you really love them, but this cookie is what is going to determine whether or not you would have accepted this bag. But if you didn't know it was in there, how would you know to accept the bag? That's where we come in. Switch. So, what are cookies and why are they important? Most of you probably already know kind of what a cookie is, but maybe not really. A cookie is just a small file that is set by a browser on your device. And it has a key or a name, and it has some value. And like a real cookie, it has an expiration date, and if it's not set, then you should assume that it's rotten and don't eat it. The thing with cookies is that sounds pretty harmless. Like, why would you mind anything being stored on your device that remembers things that you might need later? Well, because you actually, when you get the cookie, it's not actually yours. It's owned by whatever domain set it. And that means that whenever you revisit that domain, they can see it. And that means they can track you. And if it's a third-party cookie, like, yeah, not your website, that means they can track you across websites and they can monitor your behavior and they can pretty much record everything you're doing. And if they know what you're doing, then they can also sort of nudge you in a certain direction. So, I mean, we're called Cookiebot, but it's not just about cookies. But tracker bots sound kind of lame, so we use cookies as an umbrella term. We actually we can scan and find 7 different kinds of trackers. Of those, in the time I've been in Cookiebot, which is a little over 3 years, I've only seen the 4 types. So that's cookies, local storage objects, pixel trackers, and local DB. You don't really need to know what all of these things do. They're basically just forms of storage that all serve the same purpose, to remember things about you and to sort of track what you're doing, what you're looking at, how long, and what you find interesting, and then we match that to something you want to buy or didn't know you wanted to buy, but you're going to be buying.
Okay, but why do you need to give consent to cookies? Well, one of the main reasons, there's 2 real reasons for doing this. The first one is, if you don't, you're breaking the law, and the DPO is going to be chasing you and giving you pretty nasty fines. We're seeing fines increasing all over, and it's for everything from the biggest companies to the really small companies. So consent is for everybody. But it's not just keeping on the right side of the law. We're also seeing from some recent data that today's consumers are getting more and more privacy savvy. So if they are interacting with companies that are not respecting their privacy, they're more likely to move to a competitor, even if that product is maybe not quite as good as the product they were actually looking for. If the vendor is not respecting their privacy, they will move on. So what is cookie compliance? In this part of the world, we actually have to follow the GDPR legislation, which has been in since 2018. So from a cookie compliance viewpoint, there needs to match at all 7 of these compliance criteria. So as Richard was into earlier on with the nice cookies that we gave you earlier on, the consent needs to be freely given. It needs to be informed, so it needs to be out there at the beginning, and it needs to be granular. So if we've dumped a marketing cookie with our branding on your website, you need to know that that's the type of cookie it is and what type of information that we're actually tracking. The consent needs to be given explicitly. So when you gave your implicit consent, when you walked in this morning and took the bag, that's not explicit consent. We dropped a cookie in there, and that would be breaking the GDPR legislation if it was a website. As it happens, it was a nice chocolate cookie, so we're kind of on the right side of the law. It needs to be given in advance, and it needs to be easy to withdraw. So if you don't like the cookie, you could come by and give us it back on our stand if you wanted to. So from a website viewpoint, you need to be able to easily have on the website a place where you can actually go in and withdraw your consent or change it. And it also needs to be documented so that if in 3-4 months' time you want to know when you gave your consent, what you gave your consent to, you need to be able to prove that you've done that. And again, why should businesses care? There's 2 reasons for this. On the right-hand side, it's to protect your business from some pretty nasty fines. But probably the more important thing we're seeing these days is the brand reputation. So customers and consumers are much more privacy savvy these days. So if they realize you're abusing their data privacy and tracking them without prior consent, they're likely to go and move to a provider or a vendor or a supplier that is actually respecting their privacy. So, consent management platforms. What is a consent management platform, or a CMP, as we call it in the trade? A consent management platform, it's a technology that you simply put on your website, which will obtain the legal consents of your website visitors up front, make sure you comply to the law, and control the cookies on the website so that when you actually tick on the banner on the box to say that you want to accept a certain type of cookie, the CMP will be working in the background and making sure that you are only served those cookies and trackers, and you're only being tracked for the consent that you've given up front. So it basically does the hard work for you. So the benefits of using a CMP, if you're using a good one, and mentioning no names, if we will do it automatically for you, so that the designers and the people running the website can actually concentrate on the cool stuff and making a really nice front-end experience to make sure that you're going to maximize the amount of data that you can draw from that website by getting more and more consents. As we've already talked about, that in turn is going to build trust, which will build your brand reputation and give your customers and your returning customers a high level of confidence in your business.
Thank you. So, what are the things that you want in a consent management platform? You, of course, want to be able to comply to any legislation because, well, in today's world, you're probably dealing with people from all over the world. So it doesn't help you much if you only focus on, well, the country where your website just happens to be based. The depth of the scanner, that probably needs some explaining, because basically when you have a Cookiebot account, the first thing you'll do is you'll add the domain that you want a subscription for, and then our scanner starts looking at your website, and it essentially just mimics a very hyperactive, extremely nosy user. So it will scroll, it will click, it will watch everything you have on your website and just follow any link. And as it does that, it is sort of feeling out, okay, hey, am I being riddled with trackers right now? And that needs to be very thorough, because cookies can be set by scripts, but you can also sneak them in via something like a little image or even just a tiny dot, which we call a pixel. So you want that to be very thorough, and you want to have reports of that, and that just so happens to be what we do. We every month or daily, if you prefer, we generate a report. We tell you exactly what we found in terms of tracking, and if there's a problem, we'll also, in big bright red letters, we'll tell you that that is a problem, and you should address that if you want to still be legal about it. Automatic cookie categorization and auto-blocking. We have no illusions about that what we offer is not a sexy, fun, or cool product. Nobody likes banners. Nobody likes worrying about whether or not you're being GDPR compliant. It's a pain in the ass, and we realize that, and that's why we try to take as much as the work from you. So we have a enormous repository of every cookie we've ever found, and then if we don't know what it is yet, then we'll contact whoever created it, and then we'll ask them a whole bunch of questions so we can pre-categorize it for you, so you don't have to think about that because you might not even know what it does, and we'll provide a description in at least 5 languages about what the cookie is and does. The auto-blocking feature is, in the old days, you had to sort of like make some provision to prevent that whatever set the cookie was doing so. And like I said, I'm in support. The question we always got, like, I don't know how to do this. Can you do it for me? And the answer was also, no, I can't really do that for legal reasons, but I can tell you how. We got so sick of that we designed a system that basically, as the scanner finds these cookies, it figures out what actually caused that cookie to be set, and it creates an instructions file. And the auto blocker, as we call it, it basically uses that to modify whatever caused it. So I'll try to sort of like be non-technical about it, but essentially what happens is the second our script loads, it takes over the rendering of the page. It completely stops everything else, and then it finds whatever is going to be setting cookies, and it modifies them in a way so they can't, literally can't. So as you see the banner, those cookies that you're seeing in the optional categories, they're not being set, if correctly configured, of course. Yeah, so that's that part. Customizable banner. Well, the one we have is very, it's universal, but it might not match your design. So you want something that you can sort of like make seamlessly integrate with your homepage. So it's not some jarring thing that just pops at you and ruins the look and feel of your website. Yeah, and the automated cookie compliance, that's again, if you're not that tech savvy, and surprisingly many people aren't, then we take over the hard work for you. This is just an in-between thing. This is basically, in very broad terms, what happens. The user visits the website, sees a banner, and makes a choice. Now, most people just say, I'll accept all, but let's just say that they decided not to. So that consent is being sent to whatever platform you're using. Like that can be Google Tag Manager, or that can be it can be a bunch of things. It basically provides instructions for that platform on, okay, you're allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, and then based on that, these things like Google and Facebook, they'll either load or they won't. In our backend, which is very retro at the moment, but we're working on it, we have a little graph here which shows you the consents that are being submitted. This is actually not really an analytical tool, and again, we get a lot of questions about this. It's like, oh, does this reflect our performance? No, not really. It does. It can show you if you've chosen the wrong kind of banner, because if that green line is lower than the red line, then you're not getting much data at all. What this is actually supposed to do is, this is the documenting of consent that Grant has been talking about. Because if you're being audited, you might have to prove that you actually obtained consent in a legal way. So the consent log tells you when consent was submitted, what type of banner it was done, all the details that you need to know, and in a way so it can't be linked to a single user, because that also would be a GDPR issue. So we have a anonymized IP address. We just cut off the last octet, so basically it just could be any one of 250 IP addresses, and you have a unique key which the user can find on a widget that we have. Now the interesting part, because everybody wants to know what banner should I use to make sure that I'm within the legal boundaries of GDPR, or the legislation that you care most about, and still get your analytical or marketing data, which is valuable to you. So these are the general rules. Like, don't use anything more strict than you need. Like, if you drive a car, you need to wear a seatbelt, but you don't have to have one of those fancy Formula One things that just straps you in, you can't move an inch. Just a normal 3-point seatbelt is perfectly fine. Also, there's the second point is sort of like an optional thing. If you don't have to ask for consent, then why bother? On the other hand, as Grant mentioned, if you're being very transparent and honest, that builds trust. So there can actually be strategic value in, you don't actually have to give them the option to opt out, but at least you can be fair about, look, hey, this is what I have, and this is what what we're putting on your device. Separate banners for specific regions. That just makes sense. If you're, for example, here in Italy, you have to have that little cross at the top of the banner. I think Italy is the only country that has that. So outside of Italy, don't do it. Also, that's why I highlighted the buttons. Basically, if you have the strictest model we have, so where you have no pre-ticked toggles, you have the cross in the top. That means you have basically 3 opt-outs and 1 opt-in. So the odds of you actually getting consent is not very high. Last point I'm going to get back to, but you should always make sure that they have a reason to say yes, because if I would ask any of you, hey, mind if I track you, then you'd probably instinctively say, nah, I'm good. So to expand on the minimal required compliance, the banner is configurable. Our banner is. You can basically just add some rules, and I would always suggest that make multiples. Our solution can see where you're visiting from. It does that by looking at your IP address, and that picks it out of a database, and it knows you are in that region, and that can get matched to a banner. It's a lot of work, but it's well worth it, because then you're optimizing your opt-in rate. Also, if you don't like our banners, and I can't for the life of me understand why you wouldn't, but then you can just build your own one and just use our API to sort of hook up all the events and behave the same way, but look exactly as the way you want it. Now, the widget I mentioned earlier, that's that little window up in the upper right corner. That is actually not a consent banner. In its collapsed state, it just looks like a little circle with our logo on it. If you click on it, it expands to that screen, and that has that ID I mentioned earlier that you can use to sort of ask for, hey, did you get my consent in a proper way? And then if you say change consent, the actual banner pops up again. Now, like I mentioned before, you should give people a reason to opt in. And that ties into the whole changing of consent. Like a good way of flipping consent. So like if somebody just reflectively said, no, I don't want your cookies, I'm good. Then you could, for example, just include some content that requires cookies in that category, and then make a placeholder for that, because if it's just not being loaded or displayed, it would just not show up and people wouldn't know it's there. So what I would have done, like in this example, is like, hey, this was a really awesome video, and you can't see it because you didn't want my cookies. So what you do is you make a placeholder that tells them like, hey, you're missing out, and then that feeds into people's FOMO, and then you provide a link like we can rectify this mistake for you. And with that, if anyone has any questions, this would be a great moment to ask them.
Hello. Sorry. Before you said that your script totally blocks the rendering of the application in order to scan every cookies that could be set in the navigation sessions. Does this affect the time for first paint? Because nowadays application scores are really important to SEO.
Yeah, a very good question, by the way. A lot of people aren't worried about that because, yeah, like you mentioned, if I'm taking over the DOM and fiddling with it and changing it, that of course will change the loading time. But here's the cool part: our scanner also, our script, it actually sees if you're a person or if you're a crawler from any of the major search engines. So our script will simply not load if it can see like you're not an actual user. So the experience will be exactly the same. They'll just get riddled with trackers, but a bot doesn't care. More questions? Don't be shy now. Yes?
Just a curiosity. Do I remember well the fact that when you're tracking consent, you have also to version it in a way that you're tracking also what version of the cookie policy the user accepted.
Yeah, I can. No, that doesn't matter. In our consent overview, you can you can actually, if you change your website in a radical way, suddenly that there's completely different trackers, and you previously consented to, the former version, and suddenly there's a whole bunch of new trackers, then basically that renders your consent invalid. So what you can do then, you can trigger a consent renewal, and that ups the version by 1, and then everyone that has the older version is automatically just asked for consent again. So yes, the versioning is definitely a thing.